Label 2, Virtual Exchanges, Future Trends. To begin, I invite Professor Osvaldo Sussi Jr. to carry out the mediation. Please.
Thank you, Thais. That's
Just wait a minute. We will start again.
Thank you, Thais. That's very nice. I would like to welcome everyone to our third edition of Redais. Um, we're going to be talking about collaborative online international learning, or COIL, virtual exchange. So we're talking about the specific COIL virtual exchange, as you can see on my screen. My name is Osvaldo Sussi Jr., and I'm the COIL virtual exchange coordinator for Centro Paula Souza at CESU. Um, I have a couple of announcements that I would like to do right now. We are using a system of automatic translation. So some of the words are not perfectly translated, and we apologize for that. For example, the word coil will be translated as bobina. So every time you hear bobina, you know that we're talking about coil. And I ask you to use the tab, aba, comentários or comments, to ask questions to our presenters. We have a team of that collects these questions, and we'll try to answer them as best as we can. Here are some of the acronyms that you can hear during this presentation. VE for virtual exchange, COIL, as I mentioned before, collaborative online international learning, that John Rubin, the person who created this pedagogy, will explain a little better. Brave, Brazilian virtual exchange, that Ana Cristina Salomon from Unesp will explain a little bit better. And there is a certain variation of names used inside institutions. For example, at Centro Paula Souza, we adopted the name PCIs, Projetos Colaborativos Internacionais, or International Collaborative Projects, in order to make it easier for our professors to understand. But we basically follow exactly the same guidelines as coilers do. So that you can have an idea of, for those of you who are not familiar with the COIL project, this is a very, very general idea. We have one professor from one institution here. I have a FATEC, a College of Technology professor, connecting with an international partner. These professors create a plan that is different for the plan that they have for their regular classes. And students from both institutions, we can have more institutions in this case too, create a final project that is based on the plan that was given by the professors. So this is the general idea. A COIL project normally works between 4 and 8 weeks, because academic calendars are different for each country. And I know that I'm in the position of the moderator, but I would like to mention a few numbers that are important for us at Centro Paula Souza. We have between 2013 and 2024, we were the first ones in Brazil to start with the COIL projects. We have interacted with 51 international higher education institutions. We have probably over 600 projects that we carried out during this time, and we have 11,500 that participated in COIL projects. This is a very brief idea of what happened this past semester between February and June. We had 34 FATECs working with the United States, the Netherlands, Poland, Israel, Armenia, China, India, France, Portugal, South Africa, Panama, Colombia, and Chile. We worked with 21 partners. We have around 1,200 FATEC students and 1,200 international students, 72 professors from FATEC and 46 professors from international higher education institutions. If we break down our COIL projects, we have 70% in English, 7% of them are done in English, 26 in Spanish and growing, and only 3% in Portuguese. And you probably noticed that we have more FATEC professors than international professors, and we have something that is really important at Centro Paula Souza is that we offer English and Spanish in most of our programs, cursos, os nossos cursos. So Centro Paula Souza, only in higher education at this moment has 280 English professors and 80 Spanish professors who are very important in helping technical faculty in carrying out COIL projects. And with much further ado here, I would like to introduce our speakers. We have John Rubin. This is a very brief introduction. He was the founder and served as director of the SUNY COIL Center from 2006 and 2017, and is the person known for creating and coining the name COIL. Recently, he created a COIL Consulting to support and provide resources for universities launching their own COIL initiatives. I always mispronounce Eva's last name, but I'll try. Eva Hogg. As an educational consultant, she provides professional development for faculty and staff in curriculum internationalization and online collaboration. Eva has established a sustainable COIL practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. She has presented on COIL at many conferences, as is regularly invited by universities to provide professional development on internationalization of curriculum, and clearly COIL. Last but not least, we have Ana Cristina Salomão. She has a master's and a doctor part. Her studies are with Teletending Brazil, and she's a lecturer of in the Department of Modern Language at Unesp, Araraquara, in the area of English, where she acts as a coordinator of the Teletending project. She's currently the International Relations Advisor at the Unesp and General Coordinator of the Brazilian Virtual Exchange Program. And now I would like to call John Rubin to start his presentation.
Thanks so much, Osvaldo. I just want to tell everybody in the audience you're very fortunate to have Osvaldo Soucy working with you. He's one of the true pioneers in this field. He's a friend and really a wonderful person. So you have a fantastic resource, one of the best in the world, I would say. So I'm going to try in a few minutes to summarize a little bit of COIL history and principles, but it's a rich field and would take more than 10 or 15 minutes to really cover it. So COIL developed pretty organically about 20 years ago as educators explored how to integrate the affordances of the internet into their teaching. At that point, what was later called COIL was mostly a kind of bottom-up initiative of pairs and group of teachers, each reinventing this format in their own way. I was one of those early adopters. So a little bit of my origin story. After spending 6 months in the Eastern European country of Belarus on a Fulbright grant, where I introduced my Belarusian students to the basics of video production, which is what I taught, I returned to SUNY, wishing to connect their vision to my students in the US. In 2002, I developed a course called Cross-Cultural Video Production, where short movies were produced by students with their scenes shot alternatively in New York and Belarus. So 2 weeks to shoot the first scene, send it by internet, which at that point took hours to send a small video. Then 2 weeks later, the next video was sent from the other country, and it was a kind of back and forth model of film production. It produced some very unusual movies, but it was also a very exciting experience for both groups of students who got to know each other by engaging in this collaborative creative process. So this made it clear to me that international engagement could happen without getting on a plane. And that was one of the sort of breakout concepts for me, and I think later for others. So although my course was unusual in structure, even for COIL, in almost all cases, COIL requires inventiveness on the part of the teachers and practitioners. Although the model has been somewhat standardized over the years, many COIL exchanges are interdisciplinary, and that requires reinvention and rethinking of the joint curriculum that you put together, that the partner teachers, that is, put together. COIL exchanges are almost always embedded within existing courses and run from 4 to 8 weeks, as Osvaldo mentioned. In all cases, they require collaborative, work between the two groups of students, with the overall course design having been worked out in advance between the two teachers. Of course, as these unusual courses progress, sometimes things change a bit from the initial course design. So the teachers must be flexible and open to their students' input as they try to navigate this new landscape. In most cases, there are both intercultural and bilingual elements for all to explore. But important point is there is no cost to students. It is mutually beneficial to each group of students and to each teacher. And this is something very unusual in university internationalization. So the first time I supported two professors who were creating a COIL, in other words, after I had done it a few times, we created the center at SUNY called the SUNY COIL Center to support others. But the first time I attempted this, the first professional development effort, I realized how complex and intercultural the process would be. In this very first instance back in 2007, I identified and partnered two European history teachers. One was based at SUNY in New York, and the other was based in Istanbul, Turkey. And these were even people who knew each other prior to this. So they had agreed to COIL their two courses, both of which covered the same 100-year period of European history from 1850 to 1950. Well, this seemed a simple enough starting point. But when we sat down and compared their two syllabi, we realized they did not use a single shared text. Secondly, their organization of this period of history and their, in fact, thesis about what took place in Europe during this time was also completely different. Indeed, at first it appeared they were presenting the histories of two different places. But given that one professor was viewing Europe from a Turkish perspective, while the other from a US perspective, this outcome should not have seemed strange. In fact, this is why we find the COIL process exciting. When approached correctly, it allows both teachers and their students to see the world through the eyes of others. This requires teachers who are flexible and very open. Not every professor can accept differing points of view about content in which they are considered experts. So back to that European history course, both teachers had to say, oh, you look at this differently than me. You're teaching it differently than me. That's interesting. How can I learn from you and you learn from me? How can this change the way we teach? And so COIL is often a tool for rethinking how you teach. So without getting into a side discussion, I just want to say COIL exchangers are not mirror classes. Mirror classes may be similar in some ways, but this is a somewhat different model. COILs are synthesis of different points of view. And where the two conjoined courses are based in different disciplines, that intellectual extension is even greater. But the learning may also become more meaningful. So I'll give one more example. This is a COIL that took place between a Brazilian organic chemistry class and a US digital photography class. This took place about 6 years ago. Now, these are two obviously about as far apart as two courses could be. In the first few weeks, the US students learned some basic facts about organic chemistry, since probably most of them didn't even know what organic chemistry was when they began. At the same time, the Brazilian students received some guidance about photography. Then the students were broken into small binational teams of about 2 students from each country. They all then set out in these teams to take photographs of examples of the use of organic compounds in their own lived worlds in New York and Brazil. In other words, they went out with a camera to see, where are these organic compounds used? Where do we find them? What do they look like? Together, they created a rather compelling book of photos of these images and environments with reflective text across from each image. And to press this even further, the text was written in both English and Portuguese. So translation and language became part of the discussion. So this bringing together of content from the organic chemistry side and presentation from the digital photography side is a kind of practice that takes place in the real world all the time. Organic chemists don't necessarily just sit in their lab all day. They need to get their work out to their public, and that requires image making. So this is not so unusual in the real world, although it might be unusual in an organic chemistry class. So this COIL served as a kind of professional training, which COIL can very much be helpful in. So these collaborative processes on the part of the teachers and students are at the heart of the COIL online classroom exchange experience. But how does COIL develop at the university? Indeed, this is an even more complex question, as at the heart of the question, what is the future of COIL? Because of COIL's history and process being initially driven by teachers at too many institutions, that the leadership has been happy to leave it that way. What I mean by this is that despite the clear benefits to both students and instructors, too few institutions have built serious and very needed infrastructure that supports the growth of COIL. So to take this to a slightly absurd metaphor, imagine a university opening up a new medical school. And they do this by telling all the existing faculty and all the other disciplines that they are free to volunteer their time to teach the incoming medical students. I would not want to be treated by the doctors that emerge from that school. But this is typical of how many universities support COIL. Only a relatively small number of institutions have committed the staff and the budget to ensure the program is properly developed and can scale up. 7 years ago, I was invited to give a keynote at a conference at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. This audience was a bit shocked when I began my presentation with a slide that said, COIL is not free. The reason for that statement is that it takes intelligent and committed leadership to develop a robust COIL program that potentially supports the engagement of thousands of students. It takes faculty a lot of time to develop these unique courses. And it requires the support of staff, whom we've often called COIL coordinators, in order to develop these new partnerships, to assess the learning outcomes, to provide professional development, and more than anything, to integrate this innovative teaching model into academic programs. There's a lot of work in the back of doing COIL. It may be direct and simple for the students and free to the students, but there is a cost to managing a robust COIL program, and I'm afraid only a certain number of schools have realized that. Osvaldo asked me to speak to the future of COIL, and I would say that this future will be determined by whether proper structural support for this modality by universities grows or stagnates. During the pandemic, there was an explosion of COIL activity as physical mobility ground to a halt. But since that time, some institutions have turned back to prior ways, as their infrastructure was mostly built to move students more than it was to internationalize them. And in some countries, like my own, the United States, most international student activity is funded by fees that students pay to travel. So these international programs, in many cases in the United States, are what we call a cash cow. They actually are ways that the university profits and makes money, even though they have other motives and they are, they may be very useful programs and that really help students. But the dollar is very much central to their thinking about what they're doing. That makes a program like COIL that doesn't seem to directly generate money maybe less attractive. But it must be clear to all of us that as many as 50 students can benefit deeply from a well-supported COIL exchange, and that's the cost that maybe one student would be able to use to study abroad. So the benefits on a kind of cash basis are huge. I do hesitate to try to compare COIL with study abroad. They're really very different experiences. They totally complement each other. A student that has done COIL will probably be more interested in studying abroad if they can afford it. They'll probably be better suited to travel abroad. They'll have a better understanding of other cultures. Nevertheless, the costs of travel are prohibitive for most. So in response to some of these issues, I helped to develop a project called COIL Connect for Virtual Exchange. I also have a consulting business called COIL Consulting, which Osvaldo mentioned at the beginning, but I'm more interested in sharing with you in my last 5 minutes here something about this website and what it's doing. So in addition to being a website, it's also developing other programs that support the field. So it was first developed during the pandemic as a meeting place when institutions new to COIL could simply find other institutions doing this work. But it is now focusing on helping institutions grow their COIL initiatives and on developing leadership models based on COIL practice. That is, what about a leadership model that is bilateral and collaborative, not so hierarchical? To do a COIL class, you need to work together and treat each other as equals. Not that many leaders look upon leadership that way. I think it would be helpful if more of them did. So let me now just take 3 or 4 minutes to show you a few features of the COIL Connect website. Let me say up front that general membership is free. You just go to coilconnect.org and you can create a free general membership in a few minutes. We have about 3,000 general members. We also have an HEI membership that provides significant other benefits and costs $250 a year. There are presently about 130 of those members. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, I hope, share screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see the COIL Connect website now. This is the landing page of the website. There are many things I could show you here, but due to lack of time, I'm just going to show you 3 or 4, and you're all free to come back and explore. So first of all, one of the first things you see are these partner organizations. These are 15 organizations that are involved with virtual exchange around the world. They support virtual exchange for others. That is, they provide professional development. So for instance, if you click on DePaul University, that will take you to the DePaul University page where you can learn about the programs they provide to teachers and students around the world. We are working with these partner organizations in an attempt to become more of an advocacy organization, because since we're so spread apart, we don't work together enough, especially on advocacy for virtual exchange. So that's one of our goals. I'll show you 2 or 3 other pages. So this is the main HEI members directory. On this page, you see listed all the institutions that are active doing COIL exchange, that are our members, I should say. There are many who are not. And if you come to any one of these, you can click on it and it opens up. You'll find out various information about that institution. Here is a picture of the COIL coordinator and Rosanna, and some discussion about what she thinks their program is about and why you might be interested in working with them. So let me go on then. I'll show you 2 more pages here. So this is the course page. This allows HEI members to list courses where they are seeking partners. I won't spend too much time here because it takes a little time to kind of understand it, but you will see if you look down this column for language, there are a great many Spanish courses offered. Very few Portuguese, there are a few, and you can filter by language at the top. You say, I just want to see the English courses. You go click, and now you only see the courses that are offered in English. There are other filters here you can use. You can, for instance, choose a discipline. You only want to find courses in the health field. Bingo, you only see the health courses. So now let's say you're in here and you're looking around for a course that you would like to partner with. You're scrolling through the names and you see, what should I pick? Adult Development and Aging. If you come to this and you click on it, up pops a description of the course with the instructor's desired outcomes for the module and whether they're open to interdisciplinary partnerships. Yes? And then finally, if you say, oh, I would like to work with this course and this teacher, you click down here and it will open up the page similar to the one we saw a minute ago of Veracruzana. And if you go right here, you can type the name of this COIL coordinator is Carol. You can say, dear Carol, etc. I'm from University X. I'd love to partner with you, blah, blah, blah. You click send, and instantly she gets your message, and you can begin a dialogue about working with her. Let me show one last page, and then I'm going to wrap up. So this is a survey page. When institutional members join, they are asked to answer a number of questions. We aggregate them and share them. So this is an interesting page. There are many graphs here. I'm only going to show you the first one. You can come back and explore yourself. So this shows institution by COIL program founding year. And this is a nice picture of the growth of COIL. You can see how few there were back here, starts to grow more rapidly, and then the pandemic hits and it shoots up, and then it levels off. So if you look at these 2 years and these years, they're very similar. So COIL continues to grow. And if you want to find out, well, who was doing COIL in 2016? You can click on it and it will bring up schools that began doing COIL that year. So it allows you to do a little history and research into when COIL began at different institutions. So the website does more than this. I'll mention one last program. Sorry, I forgot about this. I just want to mention this. It's something we just launched yesterday. So that's why I left it to last. We understand that many people in this audience may be interested in COIL, but aren't really sure how to begin. Now, on one level, they need to learn what is COIL. They need some professional development to just understand how you design a COIL course. But the next step is, how do you develop a COIL program? So we have just created the COIL Connect Startups Institutional Development Pilot Program, where we're going to work with a smaller group of individuals in this predicament who are our members. You can apply for this program. We'll accept, unfortunately, only a small group, and we will work with them, and it's free. So we're going to do this for a number of months, and then we're going to kind of reassess and see how we could expand this program to work with more institutions around the world, because at present, I at least see this as the major roadblock to COIL's future and its success. So I'm going to stop sharing that there and pass the mic back to Osvaldo, and then I think over to Abe.
Thank you, John. Very enlightening presentation. And I would like to remind our audience that you can use the tab comments or comentários to place your questions. At the end of their presentations, we're going to be open for questions and answers for 30 minutes. So please bring your questions. You can write it in Portuguese, Spanish, English. Russian is not available today, so just it's 3 languages, please. So next, I'll call Eva.
Thank you, Osvaldo. And I want to echo John's words, Osvaldo, that you are a fantastic ambassador and COIL champion, but also shout out to Anna, because she too has really helped put COIL in Brazil on the map. I am going to do the slightly boring old school thing. I'm going to use slides, but I hope maybe that it helps also follow a little bit the train of thought, as it were. So I was invited to share a little bit about virtual exchange in the European context and European perspective. So that's what I would like to focus on. So I work at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Some examples will zoom in a little bit more on the Dutch context, because that's the context I'm most familiar with. So if we start zooming out first at the European context, the European Commission for Education has launched certain programs and, sorry, my slides keep moving, certain priorities when it comes to education in the European context. And one of the main priorities is sustainability. So looking for ways to internationalize, but also do it in a green way. So that means that has certain consequences for mobility, because mobility in and of itself is not very sustainable. The amount of students, European students, traveling to different parts of the world by plane is definitely not the kind of future that the European Commission would like to see. So they also, in addition to less emissions, they also want more awareness of the mindset and the skills necessary to contribute to finding sustainable solutions for the world's problems, right? So green as in content, but also in how we travel in a way. So digital is the second priority. Critical digital literacy is very important. The surge of AI, but also in general how computers and big data is being used. So critical digital literacy is very important to the European Commission, as is diversity and inclusion. They want our education to resemble, to represent the diversity that we see within Europe, which is small as it is. Europe, the European, well, it's not even a continent. The countries that make up Europe on that continent are very diverse. So in languages, in cultures, in many different ways. So we would like to have that be more explicit in our education, but also be inclusive, because the European Union also has free movement, the freedom of movement. So you can find many types of students from different places in your universities. So it also is important that all are included. A little bit more about that later on. And then the quality of education, which is also Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality of education. And in that, the quality of collaboration between universities. So with that, I'm finally going to the next slide. Yeah, so they have certain programs that are very familiar. Some are very old already. The Erasmus program, which is a mobility and exchange program, is, I think, over 35 years old. So there are already Erasmus babies. Probably the Erasmus babies are in university, maybe doing Erasmus already. So that has a long tradition, with the focus of it being on mobility. And this is usually a semester mobility. So it's long mobility, but not for a full degree program. It's just for a semester. Later on, they also launched an Erasmus virtual exchange. First it was projects, and now it's a continuous project that also includes some professional development. A little bit more recently, they launched the Blended Intensive Programs, or BIPs. Blended Intensive Programs are sometimes also referred to as COIL Plus, as blended mobility. There's different names for it. In Japan, they launched a project called GIGE, and that talks about blended mobility. The idea here of blended intensive programs is that usually European partners or 3 Erasmus partners collaborate in a project where the students collaborate part of the time online, so at a distance, but that also there is some mobility. There's mobility from 2 of the partners to the 3rd partner. So one mobility that is usually of about 3 to 5 days. And then more recently even, and that's because of President Macron from France, he launched the European University Alliances, and that has very much connection to the quality and the collaboration. So by having European universities form alliances, collaborate together, and these are usually already Erasmus partners, we want to create better universities that are better capable to answer the questions and the emergencies that we have in Europe, and creating a better understanding of European citizenship, what it means to be a European citizen. So the big problems I explained, and the European University Alliances, one of the objectives is to create joint virtual campuses. So there you go, already there's this element of online. Now, these joint virtual campuses could very well be virtual spaces where there are MOOCs, massive open online courses. So that doesn't focus on student collaboration. It might also be a platform for virtual mobility. So this is students studying in another university without physically moving to that particular place. Also not related to COIL Virtual Exchange, because it's not about 2 different student groups collaborating, but it is drawing more attention to the online international sphere. Now, a very important aspect of this, of these European University Alliances, and my university last year was granted the subsidy to become a European University Alliances, is that 50%, you commit to 50% of your students in all of that alliance to have an international experience. 50%, and we're not nearly there yet. So that is a huge commitment, and you cannot reach those numbers with mobility alone, or with a virtual campus where they might or might not have an international experience. So COIL and virtual exchange are seen as the only way to achieve these objectives. So within the Dutch context, the Ministry of Education in the Netherlands a couple of years ago launched, and this is a Dutch acronym, VIS, Virtuele Internationale Samenwerking, and it translates to Virtual International Collaboration. So this subsidy is more or less a time release. So a university a department within a university receives a lump sum of money, which is 15,000 euros, which sounds like a lot, but you can use it only for time release. So this is, after research, they discovered that the main objective that academics often have to start with a virtual exchange or COIL was, I don't have time to develop this. So they said, you know what, we'll create a subsidy that gives you time. Now, time is a very ingraspable, it's not very tangible, right? So where do you find the time? If you don't feel like you have the time, even if there's money, like where do you still find the time? It means that there's certain things that you don't have to do that are taken off your plate temporarily. That's what the money is for. So you can dedicate your time to creating this. And the interesting thing is this is not just for academics or lecturers, but also for educational developers. So this subsidy can be applied for by tertiary education only, not secondary at this stage. And it's mostly used not by vocational schools, but by universities of applied sciences and research universities. And the biggest takers have been universities of applied sciences, because their way of teaching better aligns with this collaborative and online type of learning. Now, the educational developers, that role doesn't always exist in every university, but they are one of the stakeholders that the Ministry of Education wanted to invest in, because the idea is that this is capacity building for mostly internationalization at home, or internationalization of the curriculum. So the idea is that once universities, not just academics, but also educational developers or professional developers, know how to do this kind of design, then they can continue doing this even without the subsidy. So that was the thinking behind it. This semester will be the last time we can apply for a grant. Our semester starts next week. And after that, we hope it will be continued. But in the current political climate in the Netherlands, where anything international is not encouraged, that's not very likely to happen. So hopefully in 4 years, we will see better times. Now, Oswaldo also asked me to share a little bit about a project that actually John was also involved in. And my university, together with 9 other universities, were involved in the Ikudu Erasmus project. And you see here our logo. So these are 5 European universities. Actually, one of them is from the UK, officially not European Union anymore, but still European continent, and 5 South African partners. And the goal was to transform curriculum through internationalization and virtual exchanges. So there were 2 components of this project, which ended up lasting 5 years, which is longer than the regular Erasmus projects that are 3 years, because we started just before the pandemic, which caused some delays. So we were given 2 extra years to reach our objectives, because they were very ambitious. So there was a research component that mostly focused on internationalization of the curriculum through the decolonized lens, because our South African partners very early on in the project said, our curriculum is already international. Thank you very much. It's English, it's Dutch, it's French, right? It's not very African. So it was very important to take on the colonized or decolonized lens when looking at internationalization. So that's why it's called transforming curriculum and not internationalizing curriculum. And the other big component of this project was capacity building for COIL as a tool for curriculum internationalization. So we trained many academics to do COIL, many students collaborated in a European South African collaboration, but also a lot of trainers for COIL were trained. So there's now within all of these universities various trainers that can help others learn how to develop these COIL projects and build, sustain the COIL practice. So our focus in this project, as you can imagine, if we look at this decolonized lens, was how to create inclusive COIL design and practices. So how to connect students, connect academics, and do the collaboration in a more inclusive way, because the fact that it is online does not automatically mean that it's inclusive. We have to design intentionally for that. So a couple of words on on this, some things that are important also from this European perspective, and some of the things that John mentioned as how to build but also maintain and grow a COIL practice. First of all, to connect your institutional policy and strategy to COIL. So COIL is never the goal. COIL is a means to an end. So how can COIL help or support the institutional policy and strategy? So COIL cannot thrive in isolation. It needs to be connected to curriculum, ideally the mandatory or compulsory curriculum, and connect to a program. So programs need to understand that it's critical to have COIL to reach their end of degree learning outcomes. COIL is also, or virtual exchange is often seen as a tool to reach all students. So we call that inclusive internationalization, not necessarily the inclusive practice, but inclusive in the sense of accessible to all students, not only those that can travel. In my university, 10% of students go on mobility. That means that 90% will not go on mobility and need, therefore, other ways to internationalize. So connecting, sorry, we already did this. VE, or virtual exchange, as a driver for a wider institutional engagement. What we see when done strategically and intentionally is engaging different stakeholders like international office, but also educational technology, curriculum developers, teaching and learning departments, diversity and inclusion officers, but also, of course, the academics and the students, that we can create a VE ecosystem, as it were. So it doesn't only depend on international office. They might also not have all of the expertise in-house needed to carry this. So a COIL coordinator can be an international officer, can be an educational developer or advisor like I am, could be with the Teaching and Learning Center. It could even be an academic, but you could only thrive and create a thriving COIL practice if you connect all of these people. And then we also always need to consider the balancing act between top-down. So there needs to be top-down leadership support. It needs to be recognized, needs to be seen and appreciated, but there also needs to be bottom-up academic buy-in. There's a lot of messages that we get top-down, a lot of things that are important, and priorities, are always abundant. But what does it mean for the academic? What's in it for them to do it? What's in it for the students to do this? So this balancing act is always a critical one. It's one that in Europe, we're constantly thinking about how to do this and how to balance this. One of the reasons research universities or traditional universities have found this balancing act more difficult, more challenging, is because professors that teach in a research university have even more autonomy than academics in a University of Applied Sciences. So their curriculum is their own, and it's much harder to tell them anything top-down. So looking towards the future, in closing, the narrative has been very dominated by Erasmus' tradition of internationalization equals mobility. But we are shifting, and we started shifting already before the pandemic, before 2020, but now we're shifting more and more towards a future where internationalization of the curriculum and virtual exchange meet these European Commission ambitions. It helps develop critical digital literacy. It is more sustainable than mobility, and it is more inclusive, or can potentially be more inclusive. There is definitely a need for improved EU citizenship. Brexit was the first one, but many countries in Europe are talking about an exit strategy. We have a war on our continent. So there's a need to understand what is Europe for and how am I a European citizen. There's also an increased interest in collaboration with the Global South, and not only because of our colonized history with these countries, but that is one of the main reasons, but also because of economic reasons. And there's definitely an increased interest in decolonization of the curriculum. And we believe that we can only do this when working with our partners in the Global South. So these are some thoughts. I think I see COIL growing. It's not growing as rapidly as it is in, for example, South America. That's always the continent to look towards when we're looking at thriving continents, thriving COIL and virtual exchange practices, Europe is not there yet. Because I think of the burden of the Erasmus tradition, but we will grow towards a more virtual future. And with that, I hand over back to Osvaldo. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Fantastic presentation as always. I just, before we move on and to Anna, I just would like to read a comment from Melise Perucchini. She said, "I've never heard of COIL before. Truly amazing." So as an educator, I feel that at least we've reached one of our goals here. And I encourage you to use the comments tab to ask questions to our presenters. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end of our presentations. And now our friend here, Ana Salomon from Unesp, please.
Hello. Thank you, Osvaldo. I'd like to thank you personally and Hedais and all the organizing committee for the invitation to be here today. This is a very important event. As you mentioned, some people don't know about COIL, virtual exchange, other people are learning more about it here. So it's very important, a very important space that you are creating to also to move forward with the movement of COIL virtual exchange. And it's also a pleasure to be here with John and Eva. And so it's a great opportunity. It was great to hear them. As you have already introduced me, but I think it's important to mention again. Oops, am I live? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, because things changed somehow here on my screen, but okay. So can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so I would like to start especially talking about the terms. As people may have seen, John used more the term COIL, which he created, and Eva used COIL and virtual exchange interchangeably. And I think this is what's happening today. Yeah, so I put this figure here from O'Dowd because I would also like to add one more thing here to our concept, which is Teletandem, which is a project that was born at Unesp in 2006. And the way we see all these terms here in Brazil and at Unesp is we're using virtual exchange as an umbrella term that embraces all these different types of active or collaborative activity that happens in the internet. Types of collaborative activity. Again, Joe mentioned mirror classes. So mirror classes are interesting, important, but maybe not the same type of methodology that we're talking about when we say virtual exchange, COIL, Teletandem, etc. So this is just to make clear that I will be mostly referring to it as virtual exchange because of our BRAVE program, which takes the name virtual exchange in it. So if you can go to the next slide, I will start talking about BRAVE. So as the name says, you can see this is what we call, this is our COIL project, yes, in Brazil. And BRAVE, Brazilian Virtual Exchange, is a program that belongs to FAUBI. FAUBI is the Brazilian Association for International Education. For those who don't know that, it's an association of the international offices of higher education institutions in Brazil. It's a very big, important association in our country that works with internationalization and has a very strong impact both in Brazil and outside of Brazil. So, and then on the other side, in BRAVE's history, there's Unesp, which is the university where I work, where I'm assistant provost for internationalization, and also the coordinator of the BRAVE program. So I think it's important to stress these two actors when we talk about Brave. And in the next slide, if you can go to the next slide, I'll give you a little bit of a chronology of how Brave came to exist here in Brazil. So this is our timeline. And if you can go to the next slide, they'll have the timeline again. You can put in the next slide. Yeah. So we have the timeline here with a circle that shows exactly when Brave was born. And then I'll talk about what happened before. This is pre-Brave era, and then what's happening today. So around 2015, 2016, Celso, our provost at Unesp, our provost, I mean his assistant, so our provost at Unesp heard about the term COIL, and he was very interested. I think he heard it from John himself in a conference that he had attended. And so he was very interested about that. And he knew that here at Unesp, we already had a teletandem project, which I will open a parenthesis and explain to those who don't know what teletandem is. Teletandem is a kind of virtual exchange that is focused on language learning that we created here back in 2006 to help our language students, especially our ELT students who are learning how to be teachers of foreign languages, to practice foreign languages. So we pair them with people in other countries that were learning Portuguese. So our students could teach Portuguese to these people, international people abroad, and the people abroad could teach their language to our students. So that's how teletandem started back in 2006 using MSN Messenger, and you know, it was like it was a great idea, but also crazy at that time because technology didn't work as it works nowadays, as we're doing here with lots of people online and camera working at the same time as microphone. Well, but then just to say that we started back then trying to be brave, I'll use the term, and courageous, and link our students. So Celso knew about teletandem, and when he heard about COIL from John, they said, well, we can do something here in Brazil that will, with our teletandem experience, but go to another level, to a virtual exchange or a COIL model that will not focus on language learning itself, but be applied to all courses that we have at university for collaboration. So language will be a byproduct of that, but not really the focus as teletandem was. So then Celso invited John and Gian Mario for some workshops that we had in Brazil around 2016 and 17 to present the idea to FAUBAI, to the association. He was, I think, vice president at FAUBAI at that time, and to present this to the association. So talks started about how we could create a COIL project here in Brazil. And then I was involved because I had experience with teletandem. Both my, as Osvaldo mentioned, my master and my PhD research are on teletandem. So I was involved in this. And then in 2018, with the help of Unesp and the Federal University of Pernambuco, FAUBAI created and launched the BRAVE program. And we decided to call it BRAVE, not COIL, because we wanted a name of our own. FAUBAI thought that we needed a program for Brazil, for all higher education institutions in Brazil to be able to have an institutionalized virtual exchange program. Yes, I think John said something very important here, that was people may be doing this at their universities because they are enthusiasts, but universities must take this in an institutionalized manner. And that's why FAUBAI proposed this. And at that time, we called it BRAVE because, you see, this was before the pandemic. People were not using technology as they are using today. And so we needed to be brave, to be courageous, to face this and say, yeah, this is, well, because when we came with the idea, a lot of people were like, are you crazy? People connecting through the internet with people in other countries, this is never gonna work. And then the pandemic came, and you saw what happened in the figures that John showed, and then everybody was interested. So we started before with the idea, and the pandemic helped us also spread the word and the idea here in Brazil. But also, this chronology shows something also important that I would like to stress, and that Osvaldo mention that Centro Paula Souza has also started before BRAVE program. So we had Teletandem and the Centro Paula Souza with the PCIs, the international project, that we were precursors. Yes, we were. We did this before. And I think it's important to pinpoint the role of these two projects in the, in the idea of bringing and having virtual exchange here in Brazil. So, and then after the creation of BRAVE, FAUBI worked with webinars. You can find these webinars back in 2020. There were a number of webinars with experts to bring about the idea of virtual exchange. And you can find them in FAUBI's webpage. I can also provide the link later. And then FAUBI created the FAUBI BRAVE trademark. And the FAUBI BRAVE trademark involves, that says that institutions will have the trademark. They will be considered a FAUBI BRAVE institution, as UNESCO, for example, is, if they meet 3 criteria. They need to have a coordinator, which is the most important criteria. So there is someone in the institution who's responsible for making this work, for guaranteeing that they are really doing virtual exchange and not something else and calling it virtual exchange. So that the role of the coordinator is very important. And they must have done a course about virtual exchange, which can be a course, an online course. There are many universities that offer courses about virtual exchange. So they must have done that, or even here in Brazil, now UNESCO is also providing courses about virtual exchange. And then they must prove that they have offered at least 3 courses using virtual exchange, so send the materials to FAUBI. This is all analyzed, and so they received this seal, this certificate there that they are a BRAVE program. The important part of this is that it creates a standard, because people can be doing other things and calling it virtual exchange. And what we want is really to do something that is institutionalized and that follows the standard and does, what is supposed to be done in terms of virtual exchange. So in my next slide now, I'm going to show you the roles of the coordinator. So this is next slide. Okay. So as I said, for FAUBI, it's very important for the institutions to have a coordinator if they want to have the BRAVE seal. So what happens is that a coordinator, this is the role. This is what a coordinator will do. They will understand the need and the potential of the institution for the development of the BRAVE program. Because institutions are different. Public and private institutions in Brazil are very different, for example. And even in different parts of the country, our big country, there are different needs. So it's very important to have a person to have leadership, in the university, doing the advocacy for this, and also understanding the needs of this institution. This also a role for the coordinators to disseminate the concept of VE among staff, students, and administrators. So back in 2018, this was much more difficult, 2018, 19, 20, because people would not understand exactly what it meant or how it could be done. Now I can tell you that it's much easier, but even so, you still have to do the buy-in, as Eva mentioned. People have to understand, they have to believe in this idea, and they have to want to do this in their classes. They are also responsible for finding partners, doing the matchmaking. So John showed a great tool where we are associated to Call Connect to find partners for professors. They also are responsible for helping with VE design and strategies for communicating a foreign language, because this is one of our biggest caveats and our biggest problems, the foreign language. A lot of professors will say, how can I do that? My students don't speak a foreign language. But there are many strategies to be used. Yes, Osvaldo and I are both applied linguists, and we have been working and researching on these strategies for a while now and helping to inform that it's possible. So I can't go on about this today because this is not the topic, but maybe a conversation for another day. And also monitoring activities with the necessary support for each partnership. So you see, it's a big role. So institutions must understand that they must have a coordinator focusing on that. It's not like a freelance thing. As if they want to have a serious institutional virtual exchange program. Okay. So as for the next slide, I think this connects to what Osvaldo asked us to speak about, which is internationalization at home. So we have the BRAVE program as a program for internationalization at home. These programs, that's why also these programs must have a serious coordination in the institutions, yes. And what is the idea? Yes, when we think here in Brazil, and I'm speaking mostly from UNESP's now point of view in terms of why we do this as an internationalization at home. Of course, because we want to involve more and more students in experiences of internationalization. We want to internationalize our curriculums. As Valdenor mentioned today in another roundtable in the morning, roundtable number 1, we needed to rethink our curriculums, which are so content-based. We focus so much on the content, and we don't realize that the importance, or we forget the importance of bringing about the soft skills, the competencies, yes, to this. And so internationalization at home and virtual exchange experiences are a good way for us to do that. So because we can deal with a lot of issues, elements that are not usually addressed in heavily content classes, focused classes. So like language, intercultural competence, critical digital literacy, because using technology is easy, but using it critically and for work and for teamwork, then that's another story. These are things that have to be learned together and taught. Team collaboration, curiosity, adaptability, empathy, among others. Yes, and then John showed or talked about some very interesting examples. I myself also believe that we have a good potential for interdisciplinary work when doing virtual exchange. Here at UNESP, we have tried to talk to professors and to encourage them to be bold, you know, and take risks in their design. Some of them will take more risks than others. But I'd like to mention one that I particularly like, which is from a professor who works in fermentation, food fermentation. She has done some partnerships on food fermentation with Mexico and the US. So the students do fermentation here, the fermentation on the other country, they record their videos, they follow the process of the fermentation here and there, compare the difference, because of course, we are in different environments with different temperature, with different everything. So they compare that. And then one day, this teacher, this professor, she met a professor from animation who worked with animation, doing animation in the US, creating animation movies. And then she wondered, can I do something with her? And then they came up with a very interesting project, which was the Brazilian students explain the fermentation projects to the US students. And the US students had to create an animation with what they understood of the fermentation processes. And then they got together and discussed and reflected on the animations that had been created. So you can think of this, but this is so simple. Yes, it's simple, but it can bring about very interesting skills, because it's very hard to explain your field of work to people who are not from the same field of work, because you know that shared information, shared concepts, they don't exist there. So you have to find a way to explain these concepts to people who are not familiar with them, really familiar with them. And this brings about an important element for us to think about scientific communication too, because this is what scientific communication is, to explain science to people without going too much into details that they don't need to know to understand that, but to understand that that's valid and what happens. So, you know, these kind of projects, when they happen, they help me think about how we need to follow this route of interdisciplinarity and try to bring about these new elements and these new possibilities that virtual exchange can bring to our classes. Okay, and I know that my time is up already, but I need to go ahead for a few more slides. Yes, can you put in my next slide? This is just to show you how big is the UNESP program. Of course, we started in 2018. We were the first ones to start, and we have been developing it now for almost 6 years, and trying to grow and reach different countries. Our biggest numbers are with the US, because there's a lot of interest in the global north. Yeah, and you can see it with Europe too, a lot of partnerships. But what makes me feel really enthusiastic about is that we are able to connect with countries that we don't usually connect here. So that we had experiences with the Philippines, we had experiences with Africa, which is very important. So sometimes you don't look, countries that we sometimes overlook in this connection, global south, global north, because there's a tendency from the global south to look up to the global north. Eva mentioned the Ikudo project, how they said, oh, our curriculums are internationalized already, and in Africa they said, so we need to go and transform and look at our own. So the same happens in Brazil. To take a look at, to look at it from a decolonial perspective, and how we can look at partnerships with the South. For us, we speak Portuguese, and in Latin America, people speak Spanish, which are pretty close languages. So collaboration with them can be done in Portuguese and Spanish by using intercomprehension. So that there are many opportunities that we can explore with virtual exchange, and we're trying to explore them more and more. In the next slide, so this is a book about the BRAVE program, a book that Celso and I organized, telling the story of how we created the program. This was released in 2020. So if you're interested, you know, how it started back there, it's a good read. You can download the book for free in our library. Okay, this link will take you to our library. We can also provide the links later if you can't access it from the QR code. And then the next slide. We're trying to do our advocacy for virtual exchange. So we did this open access book, and we also created a program or a series of videos and interviews called UNESP for Global Education. So we're trying to spread the idea of virtual exchange and the need to change education, you know, because we cannot hold students sitting for 2, 3, 4 hours listening from Professor Valdenor mentioned this in the morning too. You know, we have to rethink education if you want to keep students in the institutions in our universities. Yes, because they must come and see that what they have to learn here. So this is a series of videos that you can access in our YouTube channel with the proposal to rethink education, and especially connected with virtual exchange. And then we also hosted IVEC last year here in Brazil. This was also another intention to work with the advocacy of virtual exchange in Brazil. It was in São Paulo, and we had 400 participants. It was a hybrid conference, so half of them, a little bit more than half of them in person, and then the rest online. So we tried to give a chance for people to connect and understand virtual exchange, both who could be here and who could not. Eva and John were here, and so it was a very interesting and important experience for us and for FAUBI and UNESP, you know, to spread the virtual exchange concept. And then the next slide, and I'm almost done, future trends. Yeah. I think both Eva and John talked about, mostly Eva talked about virtual exchange and physical mobility, the blended programs. So I think this is something we have to consider strongly now, how we can connect both, how they can be complementary. And we at UNESP, we're trying to do this because we think that this can be very, this can be very helpful for our students. Even the mobile ones, even people who can travel, having a virtual exchange experience before they travel will make this trip much more, a much better experience, as they will know people before going there. So we did a first experience. If you can go to the next slide, it happened in July, last July. This was called Aquatic Biology and Biodiversity in Coastal Ecosystems. And it happened in our campus. We have a number of campuses in the state of São Paulo. It happens on a campus on the coast. So our students connected through the internet. It was a group of American students who came to Brazil to have classes, 3 weeks of classes, and with field work. And we also put our students in this class because we thought that we know a lot of the international mobility is done with groups of students who go to another country and they stay in a closed group of their own. So it's like being in a bubble in another country. So the idea here was to bring the American students here, but not to put them in a bubble, but mixing them with our students. And then they would travel around the coast of Brazil studying the ecosystems. And can you go to the next slide? This worked very well. So they met before, they talked, they engaged in conversations before that, in doing the work before, and then they met here and worked together in presence. So this was our first experience with that. And we understand that this is one way forward to go with a hybrid, mobility, combining both. And then the next one, also something that I consider very important, first to think of internationalization across, a comprehensive internationalization across the institution. So not only think about students and professors, but the staff. The staff has to understand what internationalization is from an experiential point of view. And so we are working on a virtual exchange for staff because we think it's important for them to build, to build an international university, it's important to include them in this, to provide some experiences for them that are similar to the ones that the students are having, to involve them in the internationalization process, and for them to practice foreign language, because when they receive students in Brazil, they need to have this experience too. And so if you can go to the next slide, and I promise I'm almost done. This is my last one. So I heard about COIL for staff from Paloma Rodriguez from the University of Florida. When I was there, visiting as a visitor to the university. And she told me about this experience that Universidad Cardenal Herrera in Spain is doing, and she had done. So they're giving courses about this, and she herself, University of Florida and CEU, they connected and they did a COIL for staff that was very successful. So what we're doing now here at UNESCO is we first tried a teletandem for staff with a Mexican university, and it worked very well. And our next step is we're building a proposal with the University of Florida for a COIL for staff between our universities. So I think this is also a trend to involve staff and to internationalize the whole university. That's it. Thank you. If you can put in my next slide, this is just my information again, my email, if you want to contact me. Can you put the next slide? Yeah, okay, so this is the Brave web page. You can find examples, see how we're doing Brave on ASP, and also my email if you want to contact. Thank you.
Back to me.
Back to Osvaldo, yeah.
Thank you, Anna. That was fantastic presentation. A lot of things going on in Brazil too. So for technical reasons, now I know that's a question and answer situation, but I'll have to address one at a time, okay? So I'll start with Eva, and I have a question from Manuela. And she asks, what are the communications strategies to promote COIL she says at the university, but could you share some of your experience in terms of communication strategies with us, please.
Absolutely. Thank you
Just
for
a
the
second.
question.
Just a
Sorry.
second, that we have to go now to Eva. Yes.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. And it's going to be a very unsatisfactory answer. Communication is super hard. We are all bombarded with communication. Our students definitely don't read the emails that we send as a university, but neither do professors. So I think the best communication strategy is one that uses a lot of different tools and ways to communicate. So there, we have a Teams, Microsoft Teams environment online, where people can find frequently asked questions, resources, and all of that. But not everybody finds their way to that Teams environment. We have a website, which is almost like, sorry, I can't think of the English word right now, but it's like a shop online for accessible to our professors and staff, where they can find information with links, to, for example, the Teams environment. There's newsletters, there's emails, but I think what works best is word of mouth. So what we try to do is I talked about this ecosystem. So it's important that it doesn't depend on hearing it from Eva, because I might be in a very different department. So I need to communicate with a lot of different stakeholders, and then whomever is closest to the academics or the working floor, that might be a curriculum developer, it might be international office, but somebody who works with the professors, understands their courses and their needs. Somebody who might know, they're going through a curriculum redesign, and this is the perfect time to, or somebody from university, say in the United States, is interested in this, and it fits perfectly with this particular program or what this professor is researching. So those kinds of connections, a spider in the web, those are very important. I always recommend, and we try to also record testimonials so that you have, I can be enthusiastic, but it's much more convincing when one of their colleagues or one of the students shares enthusiastically about what the COIL experience has, and not in a fake way. It's good if in the Netherlands, communication should be quite transparent and honest. So it shouldn't be a hooray story. It's good that they say, this was frustrating and difficult, but this is what I got out of it. Because that's seen as credible. Believable. So yeah, John is laughing, and he's right to laugh, but the Dutch are peculiar. So we try to employ many different ways, but word of mouth, speaking to academics, showing them examples, and then we try to support that with professional development. If you're interested, let me help you with a partner. And we do our professional development for COIL with our European University Alliance partners. So they're already doing professional development together, and then they think, we learned about COIL together. We had a good idea, just as an exercise. We might as well develop it. So those are ways to get people to be interested and then commit. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Back to me. Now, I would like to ask a question to John. Patricia, I think that we've been following all your efforts in terms of establishing COIL Connect as a tool for, to a certain extent, a very inclusive tool that is not connected to a specific institution. And I think that people still have some questions, and one of them comes from Patricia Moreira, and she says, who can enroll for COIL Connect startups? And if you could explain a little bit more the idea, she would appreciate that.
Thanks, Osvaldo, and thanks, Patricia. First of all, not to pass the buck, as they say, but the page that I showed you on the website will lay out most of the details. So you should definitely, even after I respond to the question, go to the site and read that in more detail. It is for any member of COIL Connect, and this includes general members, who finds themselves in the position that they understand COIL well enough that they know they would like to support it and grow it at their university, but they don't yet have the insight or the tools or the access to act directly. Many people are in this situation. It would describe, I would say, the majority even of people who are enthusiastic of COIL. And I cannot claim that this program will solve all your problems, but the idea is to have a space in which to discuss them. There is quite a tradition now in COIL for coordinators to gather this level of support. But what we're talking about is actually something that's a little beyond or be broader than the idea of a COIL coordinator, although indeed in many cases that the ability to convince administration to actually pay the salary or even half the salary of an individual to be the COIL coordinator may be seen as one of the most crucial steps in moving in this direction. I think what I'm trying to speak to is that's not enough. And I think a few years ago, identifying a COIL coordinator was like the ultimate victory. But I think at this point, it's just step one. When you look at a university of any scale, and I don't remember offhand how large UNESP or Osvaldo's FATEC is, but let's say you have a university with 20,000 students. If you wanted COIL to affect, let's say, 1,000 students every year, which is a reasonable number, that would mean before they graduated, maybe 25% would do a COIL. 1,000 students a year might mean, 30 or 40 COIL classes a semester. That requires serious management. And you can't simply invite teachers to say yes and give them a couple days of professional development and assume this will go swimmingly. So it takes a fair amount of infrastructure to do it really well. And that's what I mean. As far as applying, to just go back to the question, as I said, any member can apply. However, we have decided to give priority to HEI members. Again, this is a pilot for us. We think the HEI members may be more committed, but on the other hand, so I'll just pick on Ava. This is kind of a funny thing to do. If Ava were to apply, we would reject her, not because she knows what she's doing. So it would be inappropriate for her to be accepted into this program. So we're actually seeking people at the right level, which, as I said, is knowledge, but not really serious success, or maybe only having taken the first steps. And if some of this sounds a little unclear, it's because we are also trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out exactly at what level would be useful to those who participate. So for instance, if somebody thinks COIL is really exciting, but they've never either done a COIL or provided professional development for COIL, well, maybe it would be premature for them to be in this group because to them, it's just a vague idea. So we're trying to find a level. So come to our site. You can become a general member in 2 minutes. You can apply. You do have to fill out a form. The link is there. If you're really excited about it, you can become an HEI member. It doesn't take long. And we will even accept fee waiver members. That is in the first year of this paid HEI membership. We accept universities applying for a fee waiver so they don't have to pay anything. So that's another way in. So I hope that was a satisfactory answer.
Thank you, John. Back to me. Now, my question goes to Ana. I think we're gonna try to answer this together as good representatives of COIL in Brazil. I have a question from Monica Berno, and she would like to know if there are specific free platforms for registering COILs, or is it internal registration for universities? She works for Universidade Estadual do Mato Grosso do Sul and is trying to carry out COIL for the first time. I would, say, come to me, but I'm sure that Ana Cristina can also help much better than I can. So Ana, how I'll ask it this way: a Brazilian institution who is just starting. You mentioned, well, I'll let you answer. A Brazilian institution that is starting, what should they do?
Yeah, I think they should go to, I think I'm online now. I think they should go to the FAUBI website and watch the webinars and understand the BRAVE proposal. So you have a lot of information there. Yeah, you can also check the website of our BRAVE program, which has a lot of information and also examples of courses that have used. So we have a number of examples of how this has been done there, that we have descriptions there. I think you can also contact coordinators. For example, Osvaldo and I. There are 10 more universities in Brazil that have the BRAVE trademark. On the FAUBI website, you can check which universities they are, okay? So I think contact people who are already doing that. But in the beginning of Osvaldo's question, there was something about a platform. She asked something about a platform. This part I didn't understand. What exactly does she mean by a platform? I mean, tools to use, let me talk about the tools that our professors use for connecting. It depends on the design of the virtual exchange. But what I usually tell them that it's important to have something in common for the project. They don't need it to be connected for 15 weeks, because our semester here usually lasts in Brazil, probably in your institution too, lasts 15 weeks. That's too much to be connected. Even the calendars will not match. They need to be connected from 4 to 5, 6 weeks. A little bit more if they can do that. But 4 to 6, I think, is enough for the project. And so they will, for these weeks, they need a common platform. What we usually do is we usually use Padlet, Padlet. If you don't know Padlet, if someone could write on the chat, Padlet. Yeah. So Padlet's free, at least for 3 Padlets, and it's a good tool. There are many others that can be used. They can use the Google tools. Some of them are free, and so I think it really depends on the design. But they must have a common place where students will find the instructions for what they need to do together. And I usually advise written instructions, because you tell them in class what they need to do, the next morning they forgot. So they go back and read the instructions again. So written instructions. So that I don't know if I completely, and I think she's saying, if there's a specific website to register. Well, the registration is done inside, Monica, for an ASP, for example. So they talk to me, they send me information about what they will be doing. Sometimes I help them design. If they design that on their own, they just send me the information on what they will be doing. And also they send the information about the name of the course abroad, the name of the institution abroad, and the country. And this is added on the system. So it appears as in the information about their classes, and it also appears in the students' transcripts, which for us is something very important, because the students have a proof in their transcripts, no Histórico Escolar, that they had an internationalization in the curriculum. So it appears there that course had a brave component with an institution abroad. Don't know if I was clear about that, but you can write me an email. We can talk about it more. Okay.
Thank you, Anna. I have a question from Caio, and he says that in the recent context of European university alliances, COIL has been a widely used methodology to connect universities. Could you talk more about the possibility of a global diploma? I'll just try to clarify that I don't think that it's COIL's objective to have like a global diploma. I think this is another area of internationalization that, I don't foresee it as interesting for our discussion here. But I'll go back to two other things here. Clearly, I'll ask you about AI as our last question. Everybody's asking about, want to know what to do with AI. But if you could briefly, now this for Eva, if you could briefly tell me a little bit more about decolonizing the curriculum and inclusive. I think it's a point that we need to really stress here.
Thank you. I have to wait, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a very challenging and very big question, and I think it merits more time to answer. So I want to do it justice. I don't want to oversimplify something that is as complex. Also, I believe I am not the foremost expert to speak on decolonizing the curriculum. There are several experts, and they are usually in the global south, who know much more than I do. So I would first refer to, I've worked mostly with people in South Africa who know a lot about this topic. I think when we tried to embed this decolonized lens in our COIL professional development in the design workshops, what became very clear is that there's a gap between the theoretical concept of what is a decolonized curriculum. So the need to decolonize our curriculum is clear. But the how to do it, and how to do it specifically in a COIL project, that still remained very vague and difficult for a lot of academics to imagine. So we tried to bridge that gap, but the experts in this field are not experts in COIL. So they don't always know they don't understand what happens and how to make this an equitative collaboration. And the experts in COIL, they focus sometimes on, learning outcomes and assessment and collaborative tasks, and not necessarily on decolonizing the curriculum as a whole. So I think, first of all, trying to sort of deconstruct and think of it in small pieces. And it starts, I think, something that's been said by I think all of you before, the role of the coordinator when establishing these partnerships, these first conversations between the academics, you set the tone there. So it starts maybe by self-educating yourself on what is a decolonized curriculum, what could it look like, why does it matter in my particular context. For example, in South America, it is quite a different type of conversation than it is in Africa. So, find the research and the literature that works, that connects most with your context, I think. And also from the European perspective, it's often met with some resistance. This is so long ago, has nothing to do with me. People feel offended. They feel a need to defend themselves. It's an uncomfortable conversation. So the role of a coordinator to manage that and to, first of all, make sure that first conversation is an equitable conversation, so that both partners feel that there's space to discuss, to see what is needed in my context. And that requires more active listening skills sometimes than Europeans possess. I'm trying to say this in a nice way. in their enthusiasm, and they have this very proactive attitude. Let's do this, let's do that, before asking, what is it actually that you need to do? And what are you curious about? So again, the coordinator can play a role in this, not in leading the conversation, but preparing the academic, maybe. Like this, we're going to speak to this partner, educate yourself a little bit on their context, but also the importance of intercultural sensitivity, a little bit of intercultural awareness, which is also important during the project. And then throughout designing, to make sure that all students feel not just invited to participate. It's like planning for a party. It's not just about inviting people. It's also playing the music that everybody can dance to, or maybe alternating the music styles that people can dance to. And how to do that in the design. So, I mean, I'm still learning, and I'm learning with people that know more about it. But what for me was an eye-opener when I did a COIL project with a South African psychology teacher. She said, our diagnosis, the cases that we study, are all Western. But how, for example, mental illness manifests itself in South Africa is quite different. So the students, when they finish their studies, they are not prepared for the African reality of how patients will, so we need to first understand the African aspect, as Africanize psychology in these case studies. And so it has nothing to do with maybe Dutch curriculum, but it's Dutch curriculum that was imposed, or English curriculum that was imposed. So there needs to be some deconstruction happening, and it's a process that both parties are involved in, and a COIL can contribute a little bit. It's often an awareness piece. So you will not decolonize the curriculum by doing a COIL, not at all, but you can become more aware of what are some of the dynamics that are automatically happening, how much value we give to, for example, a credit. If courses, COIL projects receive credits, one ECTS, for example, that represents a number of study hours, but this is determined in Europe, right? So questioning these things, like how much work would it be for somebody else, and what is it worth there? So that's like I said, it's a much more complicated question that I can answer. It is an important one, though. It's uncomfortable, and we need to keep talking about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, I know how uncomfortable. Thank you, Eva. I know how uncomfortable it is, and but as you mentioned, I think we have to be discussing this at all times. And I would like to ask John now. He at the very beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that one of the advantages, or one of the accommodations that a professor has to do when he or she is starting a COIL project is to rethink how you teach. And a lot of the COIL coordinators today were initially COIL practitioners that had to rethink the teaching, acquire some leadership skills, and then become COIL coordinators. Could you please comment on this trajectory and tell me a little bit about how can, or in your vision, what is it important for this professor who is starting to get to a point where he or she becomes a COIL coordinator?
Okay, let me first pick up on something Eva was trying to answer in relation to your previous question, because I think these two questions are connected. I would also be a little hesitant to go too far into presenting what decolonization is, but I think what we're trying to come up with is, how does one person accept the viewpoint of another person and incorporate that bilaterally into the work they do together? I mean, that's what COIL is. And to some extent, that's what decolonization is, although that adds a whole layer of history. Yes, so it is more, it's not the same. So the same is true for your question about teachers. And I in many cases, COIL coordinators did come up in the way you described. That is, they were COIL teachers. But I should say, before I answer your question fully, that now with the pressure, I would say, to institutionalize COIL, I mean, I guess I'm creating a little of that pressure by verbalizing its importance, but we are all seeking to expand this base and ensure that there's support for the professors. We are now also getting COIL coordinators who have never taught a COIL. Yes, it's more and more common, in fact. And this is true, I think, in all fields. As you professionalize the field, those early adopters who, were running through the trenches themselves are replaced by people who learn this secondarily, not primarily. Yes, so to answer the question is now a little more complex. But I do think you have to come back to some basic tenets, and these are not easy to teach, or certainly not easy to outline in a presentation like this, that you need to go into a collaboration saying, what is interesting to you? What tools do you want to use? Things that allow both sides to feel ownership from day one. And historically, even with COIL, I won't speak to colonization, the initial, let's say, developers of the concept were mostly in the global north. I was one of them. But if I visited with somebody to do a COIL in South Africa, I'll just stay with that one, I don't really want to come charging in, even though it's not easy for me. I have an ego like everybody else. I want to say, how would you like to do COIL to somebody who is actually expecting me to tell them how to do COIL? Mm-hmm. That's a tricky navigation for a human being, So, but I think this is part of it. It's how do you go in as a listener, even when you are technically more experienced than the person who you're working with. I think it's central to COIL. And what I was suggesting earlier in slightly different context, I said, I hope that COIL can be a training ground for bilateral leadership. Because I think a lot of our problems are that the leaders or the people who are in positions of power are used to being in a rather authoritarian role in relationship to the people they work with. And they have to relearn how to be a leader who is more bilateral. And I actually hope what will happen is that COIL coordinators, many of whom are at mid-level positions or even not so high positions, eventually progress up through the hierarchy at their institutions, and they can carry what they've learned from COIL into their leadership role. So I don't know, maybe I'm just a dreamer, but that's how I hope. That's what I hope for. So the original question, I don't want to go on much longer, is you asked, how does a coordinator take their teaching experience? But I think most good teachers will do that naturally. They will learn, they will internalize it. The problem comes that when you're a COIL coordinator or a leader, you'd have to take on a management role. And management is pretty different than teaching. And how do you create a balance between making sure that your 25 COIL courses all actually complete, the students are reasonably satisfied, people do their assessments, and trying to be egalitarian and balanced with all these people, and you're not bossing them around, because that's no longer bilateral. It is a kind of irony in the position. And I think COIL actually tests all of us in doing this. We're trying to ask people to be good leaders, but also good followers simultaneously. That's hard. That's just a hard thing to do in life. And so we do our best. So I'm going to end this. So it's funny. This is just because Anna did this. I just thought I would make it. So this is a book for some of you who do not know a lot about COIL. This has been out for 2 years. Unfortunately, unlike the book Anna presented, which is free and you can download, this is a book you have to pay for. It's published by Routledge. But I do say it in all honesty, I think I probably make something like $2 for each book that's sold. It's It's not a profit center for me in any way, but it is something out there. If people are interested in getting into this field, it does have a good bit of emphasis on this question of institutionalizing, even though it's already 2 or 3 years old. So it is an option. You can get it on Amazon or through Rutledge.
Thank you, John. Back to me. Thank you. Thank you, John. Anna, I'll give you just a few minutes. I just would like, before that, to say that I would like people to keep in mind that HEDICE is carrying out a lot of seminars. We would like to thank HEDICE for this chance to discuss COIL. Keep in mind the words fall by, very important for us. Our publication vein, I think Patricia is listing it and posting the website. Anna's global education is also a very important source. COIL Connect, as John Rubin said. And I know that we have 2 or 3 minutes, Anna, but I would like to say something. I would like you to say something about BRAVE, because it's an original idea to have a seal for a country. So that, I think that's real. I'm really proud of the idea that you guys had, and I'm really proud of being part of the BRAVE. Do you think it's possible to spread BRAVE to other countries?
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so am I
back to Anna?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, Osvaldo. I think so. I think that this is something that institutions should be thinking about, countries should be thinking about how, because now a lot of people are doing. We see in COIL Connect, we receive messages, John, from COIL Connect, like new institutions joining in. So now we have to start thinking about it. So how do we know which of these institutions are actually doing an institutional work? Which of these institutions are committing, as you said, staff and budget to the project to have this? So maybe this would be something for countries to do, to have a seal. So this is really serious work, institutionalized. They have a coordinator. They are focusing on that. So I think, Osvaldo, that this is an exportable idea. I hope that people will embrace it. I think John has something to say about it.
I would be a little nervous about that last step. When you think about our politicians, putting the government in that responsible position, I don't know. I think COIL has some of its success from being a little under the radar screen, but I do think it's important that there be some level of validation, certification. I think the question is who does it, and how strong an arm. We have thought on COIL Connect to actually add some kind of, like when somebody finds a partner on COIL Connect and then teaches with them, shouldn't they evaluate what happened and put some kind of a mark there? I mean, this is also very touchy. If it's one bad teacher and they blow off the COIL course and they get a big X, and does that university have a big X? These are complicated questions in our world. But I think you're right. There's some need for more validation, but I hesitate to put it at the national level. That's all.
Back to me. I would like to thank Eva, John, and Anna for the fantastic, and Thais and Christian, who are in the background. You can't see them, but they're fantastic. Were fantastic. Great conversation. Thank you very much, and I hope we have another chance to talk about artificial intelligence that unfortunately we didn't have the time. Back to Thais. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Osvaldo, and thanks everyone. Our program continues with Table 3, Internationalization in Distance Learning. Please Click right now in programming and then table 3. See you there.